Hello and welcome to Push Your Glasses Up. I'm Mikey. Today we are joined by Spencer Perry, an entertainment writer and friend of the show who has been on before to talk about Halloween and its legacy sequels, to come back and talk about another legacy sequel with Top Gun Maverick. Before we get into that though, just a reminder, like the videos if you enjoy them, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to the podcast feed on the audio only side of things if you're into that. It helps out a great deal and it gets this in front of more eyes, more ears. So thanks for that and let's get into it. Hello, Spencer. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me, man.
Of course. Happy for you to come back for yet another legacy sequel.
Right.
A little less of a time frame between the movies, I think, on this one, but not much. But we're here to talk about Top Gun Maverick, which is, well, we'll get into it. What did you think about Top Gun Maverick, like top level, before we get into the spoiler stuff?
Oh, I really loved it in the sense that it's, I think the phrase made for the big screen or has to be seen in the theater kind of gets overused sometimes, but this is truly a movie that I'm like, I don't know that I ever want to watch it a television. Even if, I have a nice big television, I don't know that it would do it justice. It's just seeing those images captured in such a way that on the biggest screen and with huge sound, it really blows you away, and it's an incredible experience. I feel like this is a movie that will, every other summer that will be like they're re-releasing it in IMAX, and people will still go because it just has that energy.
Yeah. So you
can't capture.
So you saw it in IMAX?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So did I. It is the perfect use. I prefer on a typical basis Dolby, just because color wise it's a much more compelling image that you see on the screen, as far as blacker blacks and more rich colors. But I said, well, no, this is actually has stuff filmed for IMAX, and it's Tom Cruise doing action stuff for IMAX. Like it has to be IMAX that you see this. And I agree. It is one of the quintessential, I think, probably top 3 movies for the format now, which is going to be hard to convey once it is on a home release, because as far as I know, like Paramount Plus doesn't really do what Disney Plus has done and release some movies in that extended format. But yeah, you told me that you don't have that much history with like the first movie necessarily. When did you first see the first movie?
I mean, like a month ago.
Okay. Yeah. So we are going to have like very different perspectives coming into this then, cuz for me it was I was, I don't know, 4 the first time I saw it, and I saw it many times through my childhood. Like it was on TV all the time and whatnot. It is a huge reason why when I was a kid and building models, I built like 6 or 7 different F-14 Tomcat model kits. And so it had a huge impact on me, but before I really like understood movies.
Sure,
So it
yeah.
was a cultural impact on me, as opposed to like me sitting down and being able to say like, it's not that great of a movie, the first one. It's okay. It's of its time, and I don't think that's a bug. I think that's a feature. But
Yeah.
like, it is what it is. It's very thin on plot. The emotional beats on it aren't that impactful. And so it's going back to it now, I presume you have a very different lens closer to that than what I probably had brought to it as a kid.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those movies that you sort of just absorb culturally, from jokes on The Simpsons or Saturday Night Live, and you hear friends talk about it, you hear your parents talk, you just hear people talk about it to the point where you feel like you've seen it,
Yep.
even if you really haven't.
The
And
osmosis of it.
yes, and I think I think the things that people really responded to in the movie, I think obviously the original song is like has probably almost eclipsed the movie in its own popularity at around the time, just because
Well,
that
which
was such a.
song are we talking about?
That's true. There's a couple. I should clarify. The songs have
Okay,
eclipsed
okay,
the
yeah,
movie in a certain way, and then also I feel like the reason the characters are in the original are what people I think were so drawn to, but then also the fact that they had this really cool photography of the time
right,
for
yeah,
the
yeah.
dogfights and the flying and what have you, and but that's where the new one it almost makes the first one obsolete just because using the current technology to do the same things, it blows it out of the water to the point where you're like, why even watch the first one? If you're coming at it from the filmmaking perspective, if you're
Oh
if
yeah,
you're looking at it from you know the subtextual readings of the original movie, that there's still plenty of that meat to chew on that this current film doesn't offer.
yeah. This is a pseudo remake in a way,
Sure, yeah,
but like, and you had done a write up about this where it's not just a Top Gun movie.
yeah,
It is about Tom Cruise. It is
yeah,
about his career
yeah,
and what he is staring down with sort of being the last of his kind with
yeah,
the kind of star he is. And it's a fascinating movie on like four different fronts for that reason. It is a very good movie if you just don't pay attention to that too.
yeah,
It
absolutely.
covers everything you want from a movie in a way that movies don't do anymore. It makes sure that it has a little bit of romance, it has a little bit of comedy, it has a little bit of action. Like for the most part, I think nowadays you're looking at just like it's an action comedy. Like that's and the comedy is even like a little low on the scale. But like here you have everything, and it's I think that could even like turn people off in a way because they're just not used to it. But like
Hmm.
it is an absolutely tremendously enjoyable movie that like I feel like you're probably right. Like you can there's enough flashback stuff in this movie that like tells you what you need to know from the first movie. And so, yeah, you maybe don't have to experience that first movie by watching that first movie anymore. You could just have that cultural experience where you have taken it in by osmosis and just bring that into the new movie.
For sure, yeah, and well, and what's so interesting to me about this movie is that it seems like I can't think of another example of a movie where a studio has clearly been so confident in the product they have, in that they've been screening this movie for probably 6 weeks
Yeah.
to advanced audiences, and like the critical acclaim is huge, and even with like a month and a half of advanced screenings, it's still on its way to like a huge box office opening, and their confidence that they're building into the marketing and the hype has nothing to do with the Marvel method of like trying to be like you have to see it right now or
Yep.
all the spoilers will be ruined for you. It really is like you have to see it because the filmmaking craft is so unique and big, and it has to be seen, in these formats that any other way the movie won't be as effective, and I'm really hard pressed to think of a movie in recent memory that a studio has been just so confident in the filmmaking that that's what they're trying to sell it on to people rather than someone might ruin what the cameo is, so you
Yeah, and
have to see it
I
weekend.
think that is sort of a an exclusively Paramount thing as
Yeah,
well cuz like Universal is more in line with like the Marvel way nowadays. So is WB with at least like the tentpole stuff. They're more about like don't get spoiled on the plot points, but like I think Paramount's biggest stuff, like Star Trek aside,
yeah,
but like, and especially with their Tom Cruise stuff, Mission Impossible is another franchise where I was talking about in my trailer reaction to the new to Dead Reckoning Part One. You could watch those movies and enjoy them and not know anything about the plot. As like I think a lot of people frankly love those movies and forget what happens in those movies almost immediately. So I feel like they are ones to be like, no, it's just the experience. It's just like you don't want to spoil the experience by not experiencing it, as opposed to you're gonna have a plot point or a character death or something like revealed, because it's Top Gun. Like, what the only thing surprising to me in this movie was that, like, the stuff that happened on the ground at the end of the movie, like,
which makes it
that felt more Marvel-y to me than anything.
Yeah, that's the one scene in the movie where I was like, this feels like Tom was on Mission Impossible brain when they came up with this part.
He needed a reason to run.
Sequence.
That's like, he needed a reason to have his running scene in the movie. Like, that's it. But like, I mean, he technically had one at the beginning of the movie, but he was on a treadmill. But I will say now, since we're kind of like touching on these things, I will say this is the spoiler. Like, we're getting into anything that actually happens in this movie, but like I said, I don't think it really matters.
Sure.
But that's more for the time codes than anything. But yeah, this, like, the fact that this movie ends with him being shot down, that sort of, I almost expected that to be the end of the movie, because it is sort of that, like, he has a farewell with Jennifer Connelly. He has, like, he says his goodbyes. And so I do appreciate that with the classic Hollywood way with this movie that they wanted to go with, they did give it the happy ending. Like, it makes sense. But yeah, that was the one surprising thing, is the fact that he gets shot down, and then Goose's son Rooster also gets shot down in saving him, and then they just have that's when it literally becomes like an action comedy for about 10 minutes.
Yeah.
It's a very strange bit of whiplash, but it still works. It's just like, it didn't need to be there, if anything.
It's just a stark shift in the tone.
Yeah.
That the rest of that sequence had, because the big third act thing that they're building toward, which is, one of my other sort of gripes with the movie, is that, like, they can't commit to a bad guy because of the connection with not only the military being involved with the movie, but then also, like, the studio doesn't want to piss anyone off.
I appreciate that is a thing that also happened in the first movie, but at least in the first movie, it was during the Cold War. So, like, you knew, and they were fighting MiGs, and so, like, you knew who they were fighting, at least in a general sense, whereas, like, this is, just a generic desert location kind of thing.
But the scene as a whole is, it follows so many of the pilots in their jets doing the jet stuff. It's really intense, and it really one of those sort of grip the armrests of your seat moments. But then, like you said, it's so long, like, as a set piece, that when you get to this moment where both of them have been shot down and both of them are no longer in a jet, and they're kind of like playfully pushing each other back and forth, kind of arguing, being like, "No, I was supposed to save you. I saved you. I was supposed to save you." It's a moment where you're like, "What is going on?" Like,
it suddenly turns into Tango and Cash.
Yeah,
yeah. I do kind of wish that was handled a little bit differently, but I don't think it necessarily hurts the experience at all. Because it is, like,
it enhances what came before it with
exactly.
With the crashes, because you could feel, like, the tension in the air of the audience.
Yep.
Tom Cruise going down, where everyone's like, "He's dead."
So there was where I was sitting. It wasn't a packed audience. It was a 3 p.m. Thursday showing. Like, it was literally the first showing of the day. But it wasn't packed, but it was like 2/3 full, and there was a couple who is of the age that you would assume would love this movie, because they were probably about 20 when the first movie came out. And they were, like, cheering and laughing through the whole movie, and they audibly gasped when he was shot down. And I was like, yes, I'm so, like, this is their Captain America lifting up Mjolnir moment. Like, it is for them, that this is the big meaningful thing, as much as, like, they only have one movie to base that love on. That's totally fine. If you love it, you love it. And so, yeah, it is very interesting to see, like, how that played for those folks, where it's just like, for me, it seemed like that was going to fade into, or not fade into, it was going to play out more so that it was going to circle around and be like, no, he's still down there. We have to get him back. And it was just going to be like a helicopter coming in or whatever. So
Right.
it's,
Yeah.
that's probably how I would have done it in general. Just instead of neither of them having a cut on them. Like they both survive plane crashes and neither of them have a nick. So I'm
Yeah.
like, it's a little superhero-y, a little too much there, but like, yeah, I actually, outside of that, I think they do a really good job with letting this character actually earn its legacy in a
Mm.
way, because like the legacy of Maverick as a character is that first movie, and it is specific to a time period. But somehow, I don't. When you visit that first movie now, I don't know how it stretched so far. Like, I don't know how
Yeah.
that legacy made it as long as it did. Like, by 95, it should have been, like, done. But, like, the fact that they actually went back in and made that first movie actually feel more meaningful by giving Miles Teller's character the emotional weight of like losing a father, losing a parent, bringing Val Kilmer back and actually letting him perform is
Yeah.
amazing. And that is like, man, I didn't expect to cry during Top Gun.
Well, and for all the explosive and dynamic action filmmaking in the movie, it really says something that the scene between Maverick and Iceman might be the best scene in the movie, and it's the most quiet scene in the film because Val Kilmer can talk, but it's not
Well, they
he's not
say why. Like they say why
sure.
in
And
the movie.
they built his real life
Yeah.
health issues into the film, which I thought was done incredibly respectfully. But then also you just see his how dynamic of a performer he is still, and even without the use of his voice, it's just that is probably my favorite scene in the movie, even with everything else that occurs in the film.
Yeah. It is. I mean, of this now franchise of two movies, it is by far the most. Oh boy, the lawnmower is just kicked up outside.
Oh, I can't.
Okay,
Sorry.
well, it might come up on my end, so I apologize on the audio end if it does come up. But you're absolutely right with like Kilmer's ability to convey through a look
Yeah.
is something that I think he didn't really get enough credit for through his career. I think a lot of his performance comes through his vocalization, honestly, of the performance and his physical appearance, as opposed to allowing all the facets of his abilities to sort of play together. And this scene does all of that, like because he does at one point speak,
Yeah.
and it is an astounding moment in a movie that like you expect to have like its thrills and its stuff. I don't think anyone would have expected the oomph that scene would carry in this movie.
Yeah. It's not only respectful to the film before, but it's respectful to Val currently as an actor who doesn't have a lot of opportunities and perhaps doesn't seek them out as much. But I think it's really interesting not only in terms of how it fits into this film, but then also with regard to the first movie because their rivalry is sort of really the big tension in the movie rather than like the plot,
Yeah.
and it speaks a lot to like the gap between the movies of Iceman ascends to such a high place in the Navy that his respect and admiration with Maverick is what has kept him out of the doghouse for 30 years, and it's a really interesting scene that just it fills in every gap you would have as an audience member between the two movies, because there's such a long stretch of time, and they do it with so few words, and like you said, with a look. And it's it's a great example of just visual storytelling, you know, for an audience. That it's an incredible scene. It's so good.
Yeah, and it's weird to say this, but like it's very good world building. Like you
Yeah,
expect that with like genre stuff like fantasy, sci-fi, whatnot, because you have to describe the world around these characters and explain like why they exist there. Um, but like for this, it is the first movie is just characters and just flight stuff. So there is no world existing around them really. And so that sort of exposition through non-exposition that this movie has, um and just allowing you to feel like these characters have existed for the period of time that they have through this story for decades. They managed to pull that off in a way that I think would be probably overlooked by most filmmakers at this point, where it's just like I'm gonna keep probably saying this, but like they made Top Gun more meaningful, and that's not just saying like they made the first movie actually live up to what people think of it as, or like they made so many facets of this little sort of Top Gun universe matter and like have an impact and actually make you care about these characters more, because like it's just a bunch of kids coming together and like having a good time in the first movie, and that's really all the first movie is. There is no plot. The final act of the first Top Gun is legitimately just like, hey, guess what? Like they never actually
right.
build to anything. There's like a little bit of you're supposed to become the first in class, but like even that's secondary to just them interacting with each other. And so this movie actually having a from the get-go a ABC plot where like we know there is something at the end that is going to be a climax. That first movie, the climax is them just running the test. And
Yeah,
then, oh surprise, somebody's attacking. So it's I think with the years that Tom Cruise has specifically even had, just making movies since then, because he was still so young in his career at that point. Like Risky Business was probably the one bigger movie before that, right?
yeah,
Like The Outsiders wasn't exactly like huge. He still had a unibrow in the first movie. So but yeah, the fact that he has been able to say like this is what I've learned in my career and put it towards something that like he had no control of in the first place, like that was it was a Tony Scott movie and a Jerry Bruckheimer production, and it was them. So
yeah,
like for him to come in and actually like pretty much fully control this production, like he's putting forth everything that he's learned and making a movie that like is at least what used to be what everybody wanted.
yeah. If I feel like if he, you know, if we didn't know that he was making two more Mission Impossible movies, if this movie had come out and then he
This is the
said,
last hurrah.
"Best movie I'm ever making," everyone would be like, "This is the best possible movie you could have gone out on."
Yep.
Just because not only do I think the movie really is about his career, and I think it's about him trying to pass that on to people and to show people how he does it. But I think it's such a nice button on everything that has come before it. It's, you know, it's a huge dynamic blockbuster, but it also has characters that are really memorable, and it has it you know, to your point about the people gasping when they see him get shot down, that's a sign that the movie is working.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't get that with every movie, and I think he really goes out of his way to make sure you get those moments. Which, things like the Mummy aside, that's a different conversation. But
He wasn't really in control of that. We'll give him that.
sure,
Yeah.
yeah. But this movie is at that level, you know, of his standards. I would say
Right.
probably
Yeah.
that it just feels like the exact movie you want to see on the big screen, and it's because he puts so much of himself and his work ethic into it that it. I'd be curious, when he passes away, when the in memoriam at the Oscars, like, will they show more clips from this one or Top Gun for him?
It'll fade.
Yeah,
It'll go from the first one to this one.
and then they'll do like a thing where it's like every Mission Impossible as like an eighth of the screen.
It'll be him running across the screen and cut like each time. But yeah, I legitimately think that is what they would do. They would, because there are identical shots of him in the two movies, so it'll just do the fade. It'll fade to modern day. But yeah, it's funny because like we're like in the spoilers section of this discussion, but like just like the first movie, there's not a ton to spoil. Like it's still mostly just character stuff and cool action, but like it's very interesting how they managed to give like Goose's son. We touched on Miles Teller's character Rooster. The fact that character is in there is why I think this movie has a well balanced feel to it, because like otherwise you're just gonna have another collection of hot shots, and that's like Glenn Powell is amazing in this movie, but like every other pilot is sort of like a version of him, except for Bob. Bob is fantastic. I love Bob. Yeah. The one sort of not confident nerdy guy who's just like, yeah, I'm here
He's
too.
for the math.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I think that if it weren't for Rooster, you just have another fun action movie that maybe has an emotional beat with like somebody going down during one of the final tests, but like it would have just been a popcorn movie at that point instead of having that meat on its bones.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And not only that, but then to your point about how this movie makes so much of the first movie matter and feel elevated is, the Jennifer Connelly part is literally like the two throwaway lines in the first movie with the Admiral's daughter aspect, and then sort of their on again, off again romance, which I feel like is handled really well, even if it's like not quite as sexy as the original, or quite as sexy as like they probably could have gotten away with.
At least the kissing is better in this movie than the first. It is some bad kissing in that first movie.
But yeah, to your point, it's they I think it took so long to make this movie because they were like they didn't know what it would be about or what the plot was, and then but then when you see it, you're like it didn't matter what the plot was. It mattered that they were able to crack these characters,
Yeah,
these new characters that they could bring in to a sequel, 36 years later, and like you said, it's that rare legacy sequel that really does make the first movie better by existing. Like how many others can even come close to making that claim?
What's funny is when I was doing my like letterboxd review for it, like I love the first Halloween movie, but I think 2018 does make it even better. And I think that it's honestly those are the two for me that are really like the only examples of that working.
Yeah, I mean,
I know
I'm
you
drawing
still prefer the first Halloween over 2018, right?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you
That's me.
probably feel almost like I do with that one, but not quite how I
I
do.
agree with you though.
Okay.
I think that's one of the rare legacy sequels that lives up to the original. You know, we have so many others. You know, your Independence Days, your you know, the new
Which
Scream
I
movie.
honestly I thought Independence Day Resurgence was okay. It's not
It doesn't
great, but
for
it's
that
okay.
magic
Yeah.
like and you know Halloween and Top Gun are that company where you feel like if you put them both on your Blu-ray 4K shelf, you wouldn't feel embarrassed by the fact that you have both of them there.
And I'm hoping the upcoming Rocketeer revival
Yeah,
will also sit in that set, because if that doesn't, oh boy, I'm gonna be annoyed. But yeah, I can't believe they managed to do this. Like it's sort of, especially on the tech side, you can tell Tom Cruise was pulling a James Cameron and just like biding his time with it. Like he obviously would have come back to this at any point if the tech was there to like make it, at least post Mission Impossible, like to make it in a way that it would be spectacular to see in IMAX kind of situation. Um, and yeah, it's there was even a thing. I think part of the marketing material on social was like him just talking to somebody on the red carpet or whatever, where they said, "Why now? Why is this the time that you want to actually do this?" And he said, "Well, honestly, like Jerry wanted." Like came to me a while ago and was like, yeah, let's do Top Gun again, let's do another thing, and that was like 15 years ago, and he was like, we couldn't do it back then because we needed to learn, and that's why we kind of did American Made, because I started to figure out how to shoot things in a dynamic way that actually like made sense in a story for the action, because every action scene should have its own story within the story. And then he said, and then we shot Fallout, and we got a little bit more of that, as far as like it was more on a helicopter, but it was still like that's when they were doing like a valley run for the first time, and that's, it's really cool to see him like, when you look back at it, be like, oh yeah, okay, he was doing these things to learn to get here so that he could, which is exactly what Cameron was doing with, as like, however you feel about Avatar, that's what he was doing with his whole career for Avatar. Like The Abyss and Terminator got those liquid physics that like it's really cool to see, just from a meta perspective of like being able to zoom out and see his career kind of like, oh no, okay, I see what you were doing.
well, and it just makes me feel better about my own reading on the movie, in that it is a movie about his career, and that, like you said, you can find these points in the past 10 years where, you know, I think they announced this movie like officially in 2010.
Yeah.
So like it really has been in the past 10 years that you can see in other movies how he's building towards this, and then this really is like, you know, the final paragraph on this, not only this arc of his career, but I think his career as
It's Bilbo writing the book at the end of
yeah.
the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Yeah, it's or the beginning of it rather, and then going through. But yeah, I think it wound up being exactly that. It's weird. Like, I love Mission Impossible, way more than this franchise. But like, as a whole, I love the Mission Impossible films. But I still feel like I almost wish this was the last movie. Like, I wish this was him being like, all right, I'm going. Pardon me. I'm going into the sunset now. You guys take what I taught you and run with it. And yeah. So I think that we pretty much covered like everything about this movie that we can cover, because like I said, we can talk about spoilers, but there's not a lot to spoil. It's just
there's so much you can say about visuals,
right,
without
yeah, without
like
just and then the
experience.
plane turned left.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, it's like, in summation, it is a thrilling action movie. It is an emotional and kind of poignant as far as seeing a person reflect on their legacy and what that means for the future. And I think they just pretty much nailed it at like 99.9% of the movie.
Yeah. Yeah. My quibbles with it are like so minor that they don't impact the enjoyment of the movie. They're just the kind of things that, like, when you're in the car home, you're like, "Ooh, I didn't like that one little part." But then you think about the 99.
Nitpicks.
Yeah, they are nitpicks.
Yeah.
But
I
it's
I I have my quibbles about the very tail end having a little bit of whiplash, but like, still gave it 5 stars. It's it's fantastic. So
it's I'm reminded of, I think it's a Hitchcock quote that George Miller was constantly saying while promoting Fury Road, which was, "You want to make movies that they can watch in Japan without reading the subtitles," and this is, a great example of that. There's no reason to read the subtitles on this movie.
absolutely. And I think that's a good way to round it out. Spencer, thank you again for coming back on the show. Remind the folks who maybe didn't see your episode from last year about, or 2 episodes about Halloween, where they can find you on the internets.
Yeah, I'm the Spencer Perry on Twitter and Letterboxd, and I try to watch at least 2 new movies I've never seen every week, so I'm pretty active on Letterboxd. So yeah, follow me there. Follow me on Twitter if you want silly jokes and talk about football. But if you want to talk about movies, go to Letterboxd.
Perfect. All right. Well, thanks again, and until next time.